tariff war with the United States is killing us. Our factory has never been this bleak before. It's hard to get orders, and even the workshop and server rooms have stopped production. Other factories that mainly export to the U.S. are in an even worse situation. For our factory, to keep the employees, the boss is desperately selling off inventory, hoping that more customers from Yiwu International Trade City can help us with orders. So the pressure from the inventory will definitely fall on us salespeople. Trump's drastic move will only force Chinese businesses to explore other markets, like Europe, South America, and the Middle East.
Production has stopped. Earlier, some followers were asking about whether the U.S. tariff reduction affects us. As you know, we mainly do business with the U.S., and that's 90% of our income. As of yesterday, the U.S. tariff has increased to 104%, and the direct impact on us is that all export business to the U.S. has stopped. Even original equipment manufacturing clients told us to stop production. All the goods at the port need to be returned, and the losses are incalculable.
With
the U.S. increasing tariffs on Chinese goods by 104%, the garment trade might collapse directly. Factory orders are plummeting, machines are idle, workers are unemployed. Accepting orders means losing money. Not accepting them means waiting to go bankrupt. Caught between a rock and a hard place. Foreign trade is shifting to domestic sales, but the already intense competition in domestic garment market will only get worse, and prices will be cut to the extreme. The profit margin on a piece of clothing may be thinner than paper. Textile factories, fabric factories, garment factories, wholesale garment stalls, clothing stores, every part of the industry is being dragged into a price war. What about the consumers? In the short term, clothes will be cheaper, but the fabric might be worse, and the fit might not be right. After a few wears, they'll lose shape, and you'll feel like you wasted your money and lost trust. In the long term, if there's no profit in the clothing industry, other industries will be the same. Factories and companies with no profit will have to shut down. More people will lose their jobs, and fewer people will have income. Money will be harder to earn, and fewer people will be able to spend. Nobody will buy clothes, cars, or other things. What can we do? The workshop is now full of foreign goods, and we still don't know if they'll be shipped out or if the other side will even accept them.
This is the situation right now. The factory has stopped production, and over 100 people are laid off on the spot.
All U.S. orders have been stopped today. We don't understand how these tariff increases and reductions will affect us, but it's clear that many people can't continue their business. The streets are emptier, and many people have lost their jobs. The first to be affected are the workers. With no foreign trade orders, the factory can't run, and the first ones to be laid off are the workers. You might earn 2,000 yuan this month, then 1,000 yuan the next, and the month after that, you'll pack up and go home because there's no work. It's just that simple and that real. Guys, let's just lie down and watch. These street vendors are all business owners. The trade war is real, and it's already impacting the economy. What effect does the tariff have on ordinary people?
First, I work in finance. A couple of days ago, I asked our export clients how the tariffs were affecting them. They told me that 90% of their business has been suspended.
The U.S. Tariff Club swings over many countries, and last-minute changes have occurred. On the afternoon of April 9th, Trump announced that the high tariffs would be temporarily delayed. For the next 90 days, only the 10% benchmark tariff would be imposed, but the 104% tariff on China wasn't removed. It was instead increased to 125%. China retaliated with an 84% tariff. The U.S. China tariff war has caused widespread distress across China. Guangdong, as the core province of China's foreign trade, relies heavily on exports, especially to the U.S. market. According to 2024 data, Guangdong accounts for 20.8% of the total national import and export volume, showing its leading role in foreign trade.
The U.S.-China tariff battle is a huge blow to Guangdong. There's no doubt that Guangdong is the most affected, and it's possible that Jiangsu's GDP will surpass Guangdong's in the coming years. Guangdong is a province most reliant on foreign trade. and the U.S. accounts for the largest portion. Guangdong's rapid rise is largely driven by trade with the U.S. and the West. Guangdong's geographical location makes it naturally suited for foreign trade. The Wuling Mountains to the north block the inland, while the plains to the south open up to the world. It's as if Guangdong is saying, I don't want to trade with the inland, I want to trade with the world. Guangdong is China's foreign trade hub, where countries from all over the world converge. Once the tariff war escalates and foreign trade declines, Guangdong's GDP will inevitably plummet. Many northern provinces rely on transfer payments from Guangdong to pay government salaries and pensions. Without Guangdong's support, many places won't even be able to pay civil servants. The data is available for verification. Guangdong's vast wealth is earned from trade with Europe and the U.S., with the U.S. being the major contributor. This will have a chain reaction. Northern civil servants need to prepare for this. After Guangdong falls, will you still get your salaries?
Entrepreneur Zhao Rensang posted a video on April 9th.
贸易战是真正的开始了。
The trade war has truly begun. The impact of these tariffs is hitting manufacturing bosses like a punch in the chest. We've witnessed the history of these tariffs. It started with a 34% increase, then 54%, and now it's directly at 125%. What does this mean for us? First, the volatility of raw materials is huge. Second, foreign trade orders have been chopped off, especially for businesses focused on the U.S. market. These bosses have no idea where to go from here. Third, the stock market is crashing. Every sector is falling, and stock investors are really struggling. But the real danger is a tightening cash flow. Small and medium-sized enterprises may not last 3 months. They may face bankruptcy.
Guangdong has been the top province for imports and exports for 39 consecutive years, crushing other provinces by a huge margin. It accounts for 1/5 of the total foreign trade in China. The escalation of the U.S. China tariff war will directly impact Guangdong's pillar industries, such as electronics, machinery, and textiles. The shrinking exports could trigger a domino effect. Thousands of companies are facing reduced orders and increased costs, making it hard to maintain operations, with many even facing the risk of bankruptcy. This will lead to higher unemployment, which will worsen social tensions. In this situation, public dissatisfaction could quickly build up. China's tough response to American tariffs has drawn global attention and sparked discussions. The Chinese government claims it will stand firm, but the outside world wonders how China can afford to take such a hard stance. Why does China insist on being so tough? In reality, China has limited options to respond to the tariff war. China's exports to the United States are 3 times larger than U.S. exports to China. Using tariffs and export controls in retaliation won't have a significant effect. Currency devaluation can mitigate the impact of tariffs, but could lead to capital flight. The government might introduce more subsidies and export rebates, but this could worsen overproduction and lead to further deflation. The government's efforts to boost household consumption have had limited success. Statistics show that the U.S. exports a total of $3.2 trillion worth of goods annually, but only $144 billion are exported to China. U.S. exports to China account for just 4.5% of its total exports, so China's tough stance on tariffs doesn't really affect U.S. exports. Looking at China's export data, according to the General Administration of Customs, China's total exports to the U.S. in 2024 were $520 billion, out of a total of $3.4 trillion in exports. Exports to the U.S. made up 15.3% of China's total exports in 2024. In 2018, during the peak, exports to the U.S. accounted for 17% of the total. In 2024, China attempted to diversify its reliance on the U.S. market through the Belt and Road Initiative and trade with developing countries, which make up 50% of total trade. But it's still hard to shake off dependence on the U.S. market. Moreover, U.S. consumption accounts for 69% of its GDP, which is among the highest globally. This indicates that the U.S. market's high purchasing power is difficult to replace. From an economic perspective, it's hard to explain the Chinese government's response to the tariffs. Behind its tough stance lies a more complex reality. Some commentators believe the U.S. China trade war isn't just a clash between 2 countries, but a battle between 2 different political systems. CCP General Secretary Xi Jinping faces a dilemma. He cannot appear weak in front of the U.S., but retaliating could escalate the trade war further. If he backs down, it would undermine his legitimacy as a leader. On April 4th, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that one of the purposes of tariffs is that the U.S. is confronting other economic systems. He pointed out that China's economic system is drastically different from that of the U.S., with low costs, often referred to as slave labor, and supported by subsidies and loans for industry, alongside many non-tariff barriers. He argued that China has such a large trade surplus with the U.S. that it needs the U.S. market to survive. In response, Professor Wen Guangdong, a retired economics professor from Trinity College in Connecticut, told the media that Secretary Bessent views the issue from the perspective of whether it will promote the happiness and income growth of ordinary people. He believes that if China continues with its retaliatory stance, the welfare of the people will inevitably decline. However, he argued that the CCP does not see it that way. Historically, the CCP has always needed an enemy to justify its struggles. Wen Guangdong stated that China's economy is already in a serious downturn and will certainly continue to decline, but the CCP can use both evidence and lies alternately, shifting the blame for all the costs onto the U.S. and the people. He explained that the lies come in the form of stirring up nationalism and claiming that the economic difficulties are caused by U.S. imperialism. If people still resist, the CCP will resort to violence. It will blame economic stagnation, unemployment, income reductions, factory closures, and more on the U.S., and demand that the people bear the burden of national hardship. So from this perspective, it's unrealistic to think that the CCP will immediately surrender because of the U.S. tariffs. Wen Guangdong also pointed out that Xi Jinping's personal leadership position is a key factor. He believes Xi is unlikely to compromise. If Xi were to compromise, he would lose his credibility domestically, and people would start thinking about replacing him. Whether he might privately compromise in the future is another matter, but for now, it's definitely not an option. Wen Guangdong finally emphasized that this approach has been consistent in CCP leadership since the time of Mao Zedong. He hinted that during Mao's time, external conflicts such as the Korean War were used to consolidate power, and Xi Jinping might be inclined to maintain a confrontational stance to secure his position at home. The outside world has mocked the CCP's resistance to the United States, arguing that the CCP believes the Chinese people can endure everything, even living off tree bark. On April 8th, Taipei City Councilor Miao Bo-ya harshly criticized the CCP's tough stance in the U.S. China trade war. She mocked that the CCP dares to take on the U.S. not because of its strength, but because it relies on the strategic endurance of the Chinese people, who are so exploited that they could survive on tree bark. She pointed out that CCP leaders like Wang Qishan had shamelessly boasted to the West that Chinese people can endure all suffering, suggesting that such servility is the CCP's secret weapon in opposing the U.S. Miao Bo-ya blasted this logic, exposing the CCP's cold disregard for the people, using the public as sacrifices to maintain its regime. She argued that Xi Jinping's stance is self-deceptive. Since Trump's first term, the CCP has claimed that it was prepared to decouple from the U.S. over the next 8 years, but the actual results are questionable. She said the CCP isn't afraid of an economic collapse, but believes that without elections, the people will silently swallow their suffering. Although the CCP can ease short-term impacts through subsidies and shifting markets, Miao Bo-ya believes that long-term economic decline can weaken the CCP's regime stability, especially as public dissatisfaction accumulates. In recent days, the CCP has blocked discussions on Weibo and WeChat about public criticism of its hardline stance against the U.S. The CCP's People's Daily has published several articles in a row criticizing the U.S. for its abuse of unilateral tariffs, claiming that the sky will not fall. On April 8th, the Ministry of Commerce issued a statement on its website saying that China will stand firm in its struggle. On April 9th, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs continued its rhetoric, asserting that China has the capability and confidence to deal with risks and challenges. On April 4th, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning shared a video on X featuring a speech by former Chinese Communist Party leader Mao Zedong from over 70 years ago during the Korean War. The CCP refers to that war as the war to resist America and aid Korea. In the speech, Mao stated, "As long as they want to fight, we will fight, and we will fight until we achieve complete victory." However, there is a clear gap between such rhetoric and reality. Thousands of businesses have shut down, foreign trade has shrunk, supply chains have been disrupted, and workers are unemployed. These issues cannot be solved simply by slogans. Chinese-American economist Li Hengqing analyzed that the CCP's recent rhetoric of accompanying until the end is strikingly similar to the slogan it shouted 3 years ago about persisting in the zero-COVID policy. This decision-making system stifles anyone with new ideas, and the longer it continues, the greater the harm it causes. Li Hengqing further stated that while the Chinese people are known for their endurance, there is one thing they cannot tolerate: not having enough food. With tariffs reaching 125%, China has effectively decoupled with the U.S., and businesses can no longer operate. When businesses collapse, the direct impact is on employment, meaning that the Chinese people could face hunger. He added, graduates from a few years ago still can't find jobs, and now another 12 million graduates will be entering the job market. What will happen? Will it not lead to social unrest? That's why the CCP is very nervous and has recently strengthened an organization called the Social Work Department. Li Hengqing explained that the new social work department is based on the grid management model used during the pandemic, aiming to control sensitive groups and eliminate problems before they grow. However, as issues continue to mount, public unrest is bound to erupt one day. Looking back at history, former CCP leader Deng Xiaoping's economic reform and opening up policy, which integrated China into globalization and fostered cooperation with the West, led to rapid economic growth. After visiting Japan in 1978, Deng Xiaoping remarked, "Those who followed the U.S. became rich. Those who followed the Soviet Union became poor." Now, Deng's words appear to have a huge irony. His pragmatic turn toward the West helped China escape the poverty of the Soviet model, while Xi Jinping's tough stance risks China repeating the mistake of choosing the wrong side. 47 years later, Trump's actions within a week made the world realize those who follow the United States continue to prosper, while those who follow the CCP will inevitably face decline.